Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. On behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors who have continued to support the symposium during this very challenging year. Before we thank our partners, we'd like to ask that sometime during the symposium's breaks that you visit our partners' virtual booths. You can also visit the Content Hub on the MIT CDOIQ website for some great partner resources. We'd like to thank the following partners: Deloitte, Informatica, Privacy Analytics, DAWX, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Sandal Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Wakira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global IDs, Snowflake, Starburst. And as I said, please make every effort to visit our partners, use the virtual passport, because without them and our partner support, the symposium could not be held. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Peter Anley, and I'm the facilitator for this track A. Really happy to have with us this afternoon Doug Laney. Doug has been contributing to the symposium for years because of his wealth of experience and knowledge in the information quality industry and associated industries. He was with Gartner for 12 years and is now with Caserta. He's the principal data strategist, advises senior business and information leaders. Think about that. Getting those groups together, working together on data strategy, monetization, and governance and analytics. Welcome, Doug. We're going to have time at the end for some questions, so folks, please put them at the bottom of your screen, and Doug will get to as many of those as he can. It's all yours.
Good afternoon from Chicago, just a few blocks from Wrigley Field here. Thank you, Peter. And thanks once again for inviting me to speak at this outstanding event. This is one of the events that I really most look forward to each year, and unfortunately we won't all get to meet in person, but yeah, definitely do come to our booth after the talk here. And as far as Q&A goes, I will try to keep an eye on the question panel, so feel free to enter your questions or comments as we go. I'm happy to make this as interactive as you like. And of course, thank you to all of you joining us today. I hope, of course, that you all and those you love are keeping safe and well, and of course, my sincere sympathies to any who have been affected by in any tragic way. But I'm not going to make the topic of my talk anything about the pandemic. Probably not, maybe mention it once or twice, but that's about it. So let's move along here. Any good scientist knows, and any good data scientist should know, most discoveries begin with a hypothesis. We see a lot of surveys about data scientists that have to do with their role, but really don't have kind of much of a point to make or a question to ask. I took a bit of a different approach here. I wanted to find out whether companies that have CDOs operate differently than other organizations. I wanted to know if these organizations really benefit in any way. What kind of behaviors do they exhibit? And ultimately, is the CDO really making a difference? It's easy to lay out the job and various responsibilities of a CDO, but it's proven difficult for many organizations to make the business case for a CDO in the first place. The findings I'm about to share with you come from surveys of over 500 organizations to date. We're running a continuous study, and that also look for kind of changes over time. And hopefully next year I'll share kind of some more longitudinal findings at next year's event. So listen, I'm not the first one to tell you that correlation doesn't equal causation. Therefore, I'm going to share with you the findings where extreme difference in organizations that have a CDO versus those that don't have a CDO. One might ask the question, is it reasonable to assume that someone other than the CDO is driving these data-related improvements in a company that has a CDO, or that companies already exhibiting these kinds of behaviors are the ones that hire a CDO kind of putting the cart before the horse. Now, listen, in my experience, no, neither of these is really very likely. So I'll still leave it to you to kind of come to your own conclusions about how strong a business case these findings are. I think it's a pretty good one, especially when we combine this kind of empirical data and data from other surveys with our own kind of reasoning about the role itself. So first, let's.
So Doug, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Doug, did you
sure.
want to share your slides with us, please?
Yeah, why don't I do that?
Thank you.
Sorry, let's back up a sec. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so there's the title slide. If anyone wants to reach out to me or tweet about the event, there's my my Twitter handle at Doug_Laney. There's the hypothesis that we're trying to answer, that CDOs are really making a difference based on our ongoing survey of 500 organizations to date, and a bit about the that this is potentially a really strong business case for the role of the CDO. So, all right, first let's talk about data as an enterprise strategy. And take a look at the enterprise as a whole. Everyone talks about becoming data driven, but do they and their organizations really embody or embrace that at a true enterprise level? When we look at corporate strategies, we find only about 50% or so even make mention of the importance of data and analytics, and almost all strategies, like I said, make mention of the kind of the core assets. Of course, their financial assets and production of goods and services, delivered. And then they make mention of their human capital as well. These are all things that show up on the financial statements, and what doesn't, which is data assets. As I've discussed and written about a lot over the past decade, data is not yet considered a balance sheet asset by current accounting standards, and data is not even fully acknowledged as property by the law. Therefore, it's really easy to understand why it's kind of overlooked in annual reports and whatnot. But some companies get it. Not that they quantify the value of their data as an actual asset, but they understand its value at some level and certainly find it worth featuring as part of their corporate strategy. As my good friend and former Gartner colleague Mike Rawlings states, he said this quote: "For decades, data and analytics strategies have been self-centered, which is where strategy looked more like a list of projects or changes going on in the enterprise that required peripheral support from the data and analytics department." He said that today, we have to inspire the use of data and analytics in everything we do and across our business ecosystems, helping our enterprise examine how to use data internally and externally, and how that can reinvent how we deliver value. So a real great statements from Mike Rawlings. Now, the question is, are there any differences in organizations that consider data and analytics as part of their enterprise strategies versus those that don't? It seems it's not really just lip service. These businesses and other organizations that claim to make significant use of their data 3 to 4 times more often. So this isn't just like 3% or 30%. This is 300% more often. Vision starts at the top, and it doesn't really get much higher than those putting their names on the annual report or a corporate strategy. So the question is, who's involved in these high-level strategies? Mentioning data and analytics seems to be the CDO. As a researcher of mine discovered this relationship, but again, talking about data and analytics to shareholders isn't necessarily the same thing as actually doing it. So let's talk next about data for transformation. So what is doing data and analytics entail? Many CDOs and other leaders talk about transformation. We're transforming our business. We're transforming our relationships with customers and suppliers. We're transforming our products and services, or even transforming the market itself. Randy Bean, who spoke earlier this week, from New Vantage Partners, he spoke about the profile of a successful CDO and indicated that being a change agent is the primary quality of a CDO, and I couldn't agree more. So let's look at the kind of the top 3 ways that organizations say they're using data for transformation. Primarily, they're using data for strategic insights and decision making, and I suppose one can debate whether or not that's transformative in and of itself or not. we find that 30% of organizations say they're using data to improve business performance. And well, I suppose the degree to which you're improving business processes and business performance could be considered transformative if you do that as well. That is, if you actually integrate data and analytics into the business processes themselves, typically with the help of some form of AI or automation. Next, what we see is scant 17% say that they're truly transforming business processes, products, and services with data. I think further study would be required to reveal what these actual use cases are. But one of the things that I've done over the past decade is compile hundreds and hundreds of real-world examples. I think I'm up to about 700 or so real-world examples of organizations actually using data and analytics for innovative and high-value purposes, many of which truly are, you probably would consider transformative. So, for example, since our kids are all kind of going back to school this week, and obviously we're concerned about them and how that's going to transpire. There's an interesting story from Wichita State University that transformed the way that it accepts applicants, not just based on grade scores or grades and scores and interviews, but rather by matching particulars about the candidates, the students, with the program's course requirements and the curriculum itself. What this has led to is more fuller courses, greater student success, and higher revenues for the university. Another example comes from a company called Vestas, which builds and installs wind turbines. They now use supercomputing-based forecast models that take into account 200 variables and 20 plus petabytes of weather data, all the way from the ground, all the way up to like 300 feet, I think it is, where the blades are. And so they use all these 20 petabytes of weather data to identify precise optimal turbine placement with a 10 square meter within a 10 square meter grid, whereas previously they could only optimize it within a 27 square kilometer grid. They now determine the placement, can determine this optimal placement within 15 minutes versus over 3 weeks, it used to take them previously. Another kind of transformative example is the city of Malmö, Sweden's police department, that reduced 9 months of manual analysis of crime data, such as communication behavior from phone calls in combination with crime statistics, weather, days of the week, city events, and hundreds of thousands of interrogations. And they can now analyze this in 3 minutes of automated analysis. And in fact, it actually helped them some years ago to locate a serial killer. So I don't think there's much more transformative than that. I think there's no real surprise that the typical kind of culprit behind these kinds of transformations is the CDO, but not just any kind of CDO. We recognize that there really are kind of two main classes of CDOs. And I think, again, Randy Bean mentioned them earlier on. There's one CDO who acts more in a kind of a consultative capacity, maybe developing data strategies and initiating some data governance efforts. This CDO more frequently reports to the CIO or maybe to the COO. The other class of CDO is an actual executive who, and I think Randy calls these like tier 1 CDOs, who is truly responsible and accountable for all things data in the organization. Reports to the CEO, or at least has a spot on the executive team. What we find is that fewer than 40% of CDOs are in this category. In organizations with this kind of executive CDO, the one with the resources, the influence, and the authority, we found that they're actually 4 times more likely, these organizations are 4 times more likely to be using data to transform the business. And what about organizations where the CIO still maintains some kind of like ultimate responsibility for the company's data assets? Well, we find that they're far less likely to be doing things like advanced analytics than those with an actual CDO. Why? Just speculation, but I believe this is because organizations without empowered CDOs, things like data quality and data availability continue to be a significant impediment to analytics. So let's talk about data democratization. We often hear business and data leaders talk about democratizing data, but what does this kind of data democratization really mean? Many of you, I'm sure, know Bernard Marr, and I think his succinct definition is probably as good as any. He said that it's when everybody has access to data and there are no gatekeepers that create a bottleneck at the gateway to data. This requires that we accompany the access with an easy way for people to understand the data so that they can use it to expedite decision-making and uncover opportunities for the organization. The goal is to have anybody use data at any time to make decisions with no barriers to access or understanding. So I think that's a pretty complete definition of data democratization, for him to say. But if the goal is for data to be shared freely throughout the organization, it first has to be considered an asset, not just talked about it as one. And you may have heard me talk before about this topic, but unfortunately, our study here indicates that fewer than 20% of companies really treat data as an actual asset. Yet here we are in the midst of the information age, and everyone knows the power of data, but still the vast majority of companies are sitting in like the 20th century and haven't made the necessary cultural shift. It shouldn't be that difficult, really. Most companies follow a strict asset management discipline for their other assets, things like their financial assets or their physical assets or capital, or even their other kinds of IP assets like their trademarks and patents and copyrights, which are considered balance sheet assets. Now, so why can't we adapt these frameworks and procedures? And there are actually ISO standards out there like PAS 55 for managing the physical assets. Why can't we adopt these kinds of frameworks and procedures toward the management of information assets? I think perhaps it's because data is not a balance sheet asset yet, or maybe because we, IT folks are to blame because we love inventing new methods kind of more than we do adapting existing ones, unfortunately. So let's consider for a moment the concept of data ownership while we're on this topic. Data ownership is one of the tenets of almost every data governance program. Every data governance program says, let's assign some data owners. I think this is one of the most dreadful concepts, or at least monikers, that we data professionals have ever come up with. It's not really a problem with the idea of somebody having, responsibility and accountability for the data. It's about that title itself, that ownership title. So many of you probably know Tom, the data doc Redman, who called the term data owner one of the scourges of the earth, he once said. And Barbara Tulip, who spoke earlier, scratched this term from Dell EMC's vocabulary when she was at CDO. She says the term just encourages politics and information silos. And the policy that she instated was that, there's a quote from her, she says that data is a shared asset and the property of the company, not individual business units or people. She said this is a policy that was signed off on by the senior executive team. I also love the term that Len Silverstein used in his talk earlier today about data hoarding. He calls it data mining. Get it? Mining. So I encourage you to watch his entire talk about how culture trumps data strategy. It's really, really good stuff. Anyway, maybe instead of data owners, if we started using terms like data trustee or data fiduciary, as I've long been recommending to clients, and actually now the state of New York is enforcing that term data fiduciary, we wouldn't see data being hoarded or begrudgingly shared by so many organizations. And again, it's really no surprise we see organizations with CDOs being 3 times more likely to be sharing data freely among individuals and departments than those with no CDO. I mean, how else are you going to establish the kinds of necessary mandates and policies and procedures and make the cultural shifts that Len was talking about? So I'm sorry, this just isn't going to happen with only a CIO or and a director or manager level head of data warehousing or BI. It's just not going to happen. It just doesn't happen. So anyway, let's cover the next topic. We're going to talk about data literacy or data fluency. So we've talked about culture change being one of the major drivers of becoming so-called data driven, as and Tom Davenport still uses that term. And we may have come up with it. the build a data warehouse or data lake and they will come kind of approach has failed over and over. Yet business people are definitely craving data and craving it in a big way. We hear this time and time again on client engagement. So let's take a look at some of the factors that are, tend to be holding back these kinds of organizations. Now, listen, we didn't run a true data literacy, test or exam of these companies. That's something that, that others are doing. But we did get some kind of interesting data here. Starting at the bottom is a bit of a shocker. We found that 1/3 of those surveyed believe data is a balance sheet asset. I guess this is a little bit better. When I surveyed senior executives about 8 or 9 years ago, we found that 70% actually believed that data was a balance sheet asset, and it's actually not. It certainly should be. It definitely qualifies as one. If you've heard me talk before or read my book, I talk about this, that data meets the criteria because it's something that is owned and controlled. It's exchangeable for cash, and it generates probable future economic benefits. And also, it's separable from other kinds of assets, which is another quality of something that's considered an asset by the accounting profession. But alas, it's not considered an asset, with a couple of rare exceptions. Like if you're a data broker and you actually purchase outright a database from another company or a data broker, you actually can put that on the balance sheet as other intangibles and depreciated in a straight line. So, but anyway, that's a very rare exception, and only pretty much for data brokers. You can see here from some of these findings that we also have a bit of data producer consumer disconnect, or disconnect among producers and consumers of data, leading data literacy kinds of issues. First, a large swath of people don't even know who's using the data that they produce or what they're using it for. Listen, if you're generating data without much purview into how it's being used, you're probably not producing it in a way or formatting it in a way or making it available in a way that makes it usable to other people or for other purposes. Moreover, if neither you as the producer of data nor anyone else are doing something like cataloging or describing that data, then it's not discoverable or understandable or trustable. Is that a word? Trustable, trustworthy. So finally, we see some growth in the adoption and training on analytic tools beyond spreadsheets the past couple of years. But again, this isn't where it needs to be for an organization to even approach being data driven or optimizing its use of data and analytics. So this isn't from our study. This is just from our own experience, and of the dozens of companies that have approached us about establishing data literacy programs the past year, every one of these requests and conversations were exclusively from and with CDOs, not CIOs or really anyone else. Others were involved, but it was a CDO kind of led discussion. And when I say CDO, I might mean vice president of enterprise data or anything like that. I'm not being doctrinaire about the term, just about the role itself. So this isn't to say that achieving high levels of data literacy or fluency throughout a company isn't possible without a CDO. It just don't see that happening at all. I don't know about any of you or some of you who are involved in data literacy efforts, whether you see these things happening without really a CDO being involved. So, assuming it takes a CDO to get such kind of programs underway, would you really want to forego a concerted effort in fast, in this economy that's fast digitalizing? I certainly wouldn't want to have anyone other than a CDO kind of leading that charge. So next, let's talk about monetizing data. One of my favorite topics. Most of my work the past several years has been in helping organizations, helping businesses develop new and innovative value streams from their data. So now this doesn't necessarily mean, when I talk about data monetization and when others like Barb Wixom talk about data monetization, it's not necessarily about selling data, but rather about deploying it in a variety of ways, both internally, that generate value streams. So remember, as I've long argued, data is not the new oil. Data has these unique characteristics that make it much distinct from oil. Data is what economists would call a non-rivalrous, non-depleting, and even regenerative asset. That is, you can use data simultaneously for multiple purposes. You can use it again and again, and when you do use it, it typically generates more data whenever and wherever you're using it. So companies whose business leaders and data leaders get this, whether they think about it explicitly or whether it's just intuitive, these are the ones that are winning or poised to win in their industry. So let's take a look at the state of affairs when it comes to monetizing data. The good news, I suppose, is that about half of organizations believe they're finding ways to monetize their data externally and not just internally. 10% license data to others, and a few more exchange data in return for goods or services or other kinds of commercial considerations like discounts. That kind of model, it's easy to draw kind of the analogy to the grocery store model. So you go into your, I don't know if I have a card here, but you go into your grocery store and you scan your loyalty card, right, in exchange for a discount. But what was really happening, and we all know what's really happening, is that we're actually exchanging information about us and our purchase for free food. So we're starting to see these kinds of transactions occur in the B2B world as well. Finally, we see here that fewer than a third of companies say they're generating value from the company in a multitude of ways. And by this, we mean you're not just using it for some operational purpose and then maybe for some kind of single analytic purpose. So this actually aligns with the New Vantage study that we saw earlier this week, which indicates that only 12% of CDOs have revenue responsibility. Listen, without revenue responsibility, why would a CDO make monetizing data a priority, at all? Yes, I know there's kind of a balance of CDOs focusing on offense versus defense, but are they actually focusing on generating new measurable value streams? It seems not as much as perhaps they should or could. And imagine how far behind the curve any business is when they haven't figured out how to wield data like cash. These are probably ones with business leaders who, like look at the company balance sheet and don't realize they're looking at something defined in the 1930s that's largely unchanged since then. Yes, the balance sheet has its roots in the 1930s SEC. It's a ubiquitous document that somehow convinces them that data isn't really an asset and therefore shouldn't be leveraged as one. And I think that's just a tragic mistake. But here's the real eye opener. Organizations with a true CDO executive are 7 times more likely to be generating cash, sharing or selling their data externally. Again, this isn't like 7% or 70%. This is 700% more often. Moreover, these kinds of companies are 3 times more likely to be generating other forms of commercial value by externalizing their data assets. Listen, no disrespect to CIOs, they've got a thankless and insanely difficult job. We all know, but they seem to continue to either kind of disregard the potential economic value, like the real full potential economic value of the company's data, or perhaps they just have too many other priorities like keeping the lights on and disks spinning and people connected today to the VPN. So it's understandable. All right, so next let's talk about measuring data's value. One of the 3 cornerstones of Infonomics is that of measuring data. One of my original hypotheses was that most companies don't manage data particularly well, certainly not with the discipline that they don't manage their other assets because they're not measuring it in any way. Yeah, listen, I'm as much to blame as anybody. We all got totally geeked out over big data and how big it is and breaking out the measuring tape. But listen, we IT nerds were measuring the wrong thing. If we had paid the least amount of attention to how other assets are measured, okay, think about other assets in your company. We don't talk about how big they are, or very often. We're talking about things like quality. This would have led us to have leading. This would have led us as IT professionals and data professionals to lead efforts to measure data's various quality characteristics, measure its potential value, measure its business relevancy, measure its cost, its impact on business performance, measure information's market value, and measure its top and bottom line impact on the organization. But no, we had to fixate on terabytes and gigabits instead. As the old adage goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think our failure to measure anything about data, let alone the most important economic factors, have led to insufficient budgets and insufficient resources for doing things like data quality and master data management and metadata management. building data warehouses and lakes, or integrating external data sources. So I see the question about data as the new soil. Again, soil is difficult to use. You can't use a bucket of soil for multiple purposes. You can use a unit of data, a data set for multiple purposes simultaneously. It's very difficult to use a unit of soil for multiple purposes. Also, soil doesn't create more soil like data does, and soil doesn't, you can use soil over and over, so it does have that quality. So yeah, it's not the new soil either. I think we really need to recognize the unique economic qualities. Anyway, so of data. So let's look at the graphic. I think these are just downright daunting numbers. Think about as you look at this slide. All right, think about your organization's main asset. Okay, close your eyes or think for a second. What is your company's or your organization's main asset? Is it a product? Is it some kind of financial investment? Is it a service you offer? What? Now, in your mind, replace the word data throughout this slide with whatever that asset is. Here, I'll make it easier for you. Now consider if you were the one responsible for that asset, and you were one of the 89% of companies that didn't know the cost basis, or one of the 88% of companies that had absolutely no value assessment for that asset, or one of the 79% of companies, if I got the math right here, yeah, that didn't gauge its quality. How long would you be able to keep your job? This is what retired KPMG managing partner and a friend of mine, Stan Rosenthal, refers to as the kind of, he calls this the gross negligence that's rampant throughout the business world when it comes to understanding the value of data. Or imagine, let's say you're involved in a merger or acquisition, and the private equity firm or VC or accounting firm, I'll pause for a second, let the siren go by. One of the joys of living in the city proper. So imagine you're involved in a merger or acquisition, and the PE firm or the VC or accounting firm that you're working with has a due diligence process that completely ignores the value of the acquiree's data assets as part of the transaction. Well, this is what I found in assessing over a dozen different due diligence methodologies from household name, private equity, and accounting firms. Rather than asking, so I thought about approaching them, but rather than asking these clients, dude, do you know what century this is? Instead, I started working with them to develop what I call a data diligence process that easily bolts on to existing due diligence approaches to measure data's potential value, its market value, its quality characteristics, and a dozen other factors of value, cost, risks, and synergies among the. So this is something that we've started rolling out. Now, some companies have found that they're significantly undervalued once they actually start valuating their data assets. Case in point, you may have heard United Airlines and heard about United Airlines and American Airlines recently with their businesses stricken by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just wrote about this in Forbes last month. Both airlines and both United and American looked through their cushions to figure out what they had to sell or otherwise leverage to stay afloat. And what did they find? Well, no surprise. They both have secured multi-billion-dollar loans by collateralizing their Mileage Plus and Advantage customer loyalty programs, respectively. But catch this: the third-party appraisals of their data suggest that this data is worth 2 to 3 times more than the market value of the companies themselves. I'll say that again. The data is worth 2 to 3 times more than the market value of the companies themselves. United's customer data was valued at $20 billion, while its market cap at the time was about $9 billion. And similarly, American's data was valued at a minimum of $19 billion and up to a jaw-dropping like $30 billion, whereas its own market cap was hovering around $8 billion. So, consider the value of data. There's other stories like from Caesars Entertainment and Sports Authority and others where the data was tremendously valued compared to the value of the business itself. So, I get a little excited about that. So listen, CDOs, as a result of this and these kinds of eye-openers, CDOs unwittingly may be the caretakers of their company's most valuable asset, its data. But nobody's going to know this if they don't measure it. And I guess you could wait until your company is on the ropes, to measure the data. But why wait? the study found a bit of sunshine on the topic that organizations with executive CDOs are actually 3 to 4 times more likely to formally evaluate, or valorize if you prefer, the company's data assets. Unfortunately, without the CDO being being an executive peer of the CFO, this doesn't seem to happen any more often. We've discussed data quality at a high level, and we touched on data governance, but let's see what the actual state of affairs is. First, we see that paltry 18% of respondents believe that their data quality is a cultural cultural focus in their organizations, and therefore leads to good all-around data quality. Again, here, imagine the numbers with any other kind of corporate asset. Heads would roll. So I guess there's a bit of a bright spot. Percent of organizations do measure data quality to some degree. I suppose this could be simple accuracy, integrity, or format checks for some of their data, but we'd have to drill into it to find out. But ideally, organizations should be measuring a variety of data quality factors across multiple data assets. If you're one of the few companies I've seen that posts its data quality metrics on a big sheet of paper in the hallway, then good on you. I'm actually thrilled when I see something like this. But how terribly sad is it that in today's world, nearly 3/4 of the respondents claim that throughout their organization, people regularly argue about whose data is right or wrong. How in the world can a company hope to execute efficiently or make consistent decisions with that kind of situation? I'm not sure we should blame data quality. I think the sprawl of data sheets, sprawl of spreadsheets containing data extracts, or what Wayne Eckerson calls spread marks, great term, are as much the culprit as really anything. So let's look at some other findings from this. Listen, like I said, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it, or if you don't measure it, you can't manage it well. This refers as much to data as any other asset. And here we see that sunshine truly is the best disinfectant in a big way. Another interesting find is that, and I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, perhaps these two findings kind of go together in some way. That is, measuring data quality actually leads to some better data quality, which makes data science more practicable. Same here, if measuring an asset leads to improvements in managing it, then accordingly managing an asset better leads to being able to monetize it better. It also seems here that the qualities you're measuring matter as well. Accuracy and completeness, as we mentioned, are just 2 of the dozen or so data quality metrics that I recommend and develop models for measuring, such as things like timeliness or latency, scarcity, integrity, precision, and so forth. So if you're interested, reach out to me more if you're interested in more on that topic. And finally, we found that a mere reliance on anecdotal data quality evidence rather than actual true metrics is a significant inhibitor to generating value from data. Now, listen, anecdotes can be good. They can certainly help present the pathos portion of the argument. But it seems that hard numbers like these, which represent kind of the logos component of the argument, carries more weight. Yes, I'm simply here today to emphasize the ethos argument. Aristotle would be so proud. So anyway, it's probably not a big surprise to any of us, but certainly, this finding is helpful for making the business case for an enterprise data governance program, and the data executive to lead it as well. Notice that this finding isn't just about any kind of data quality issue. It's about debilitating ones that materially impair the business, not just kind of data quality in general. And there's some really cool folks out there who are doing some data quality metrics. All right, let's kind of start to wrap things up a little bit, and we'll take some questions. A couple more topics here. Earlier, I discussed private equity firms, VCs, and so forth, and how they systematically and explicitly ignore or overlook the value of a company's data assets. Investors and markets, however, are another matter altogether. So let's have a look. While investors may not explicitly measure the value of a company's assets, the markets do favor data savvy companies in a big way. There's some separate research that I performed some years ago that looked at companies that demonstrate certain kinds of data savvy or data driven behaviors, like hiring a CDO or setting up a data governance program and hiring a team of, while these kinds of behaviors are becoming more mainstream for sure, I found that these kinds of companies have a market to book value, or more specifically for you quants, it's called a Tobin's Q ratio, That's nearly 2 times higher than the average publicly traded company. Again, we're not talking about 2% or 20%. We're talking a 200% higher relative valuation. And again, this, the causal relationship behind this is a little less certain, but I just don't think there's any doubt that there's something about these kinds of companies that investors really tend to dig. And just for good measure, no pun intended, I separated out the companies that make a living selling data or where data or digital goods are their primary offering. Here, we found that markets favor these kinds of companies in terms of their valuation by nearly 3 to 1 over the average company. Listen, in all my years of research at Gartner and thereafter, I haven't found a more compelling argument for embracing data-savvy kinds of behaviors or developing data or digital solutions and the need for a data executive to formulate and lead them than this finding here. So boards and shareholders, let's get back to internally a little bit. Now, while I haven't yet got around to formally surveying or interviewing board members on these topics, dozens of CDOs and CIOs I've met with say that they have started getting these kinds of questions from their boards or senior executives. Listen, my advice would be to become very prepared to answer these kinds of questions, these kinds of inquiries. Even in CDO job interviews, I'm currently coaching some individuals on kind of transitions, and they've been hearing these kinds of questions in the form of how would you intend to treat data as an asset? How would you determine the worth of our company's data, or how would you create new value streams from this data? So listen, the way to begin to formulate serious answers to these approaches, approaches to these kinds of questions, and really address most everything we've talked about today is something you probably know I anticipated long ago and have been wrestling with for well over a decade. Ever since the businesses that had been in the Twin Towers during the 9/11 terror attacks contacted us at Gartner lamenting not only the tragic loss of life, but also the loss of their data and the inability to collect insurance on the loss of the data, I've been thinking about what it means for data to be considered an asset or considered property. And listen, I'm the first one to admit that there's really not a lot new about Infonomics. At its core, it's about applying tried and true, as I mentioned before, asset management kinds of principles and practices to the measurement, management, and monetization of information. Unfortunately, as we've seen today, we're still kind of in the early stages of a lot of this. And from your experience that this is a vicious cycle for many organizations. A failure to measure information's value leads to an inability to manage it like an asset, which leads to the failure to generate sufficient or optimal value from it. The basic concept of Infonomics is to flip the script or kind of reverse the curse, as we say here in Chicago. And Infonomics, so what Infonomics is yes, it's a theory about information as an economic asset, and even a fifth factor of production and how to apply traditional kinds of economic principles to information, but it's also a set of practical ideas and methods designed specifically for CDOs. Only a few people actually know that before I started writing the book, I printed photos and profiles of some of you CDOs that I know, and actually put them up on my office wall to constantly remind me who I was writing this for. And thankfully, the response from CDOs and other data and analytics leaders who've been applying these kinds of concepts has really been overwhelming, and I'm really, really gratified by that. But listen, I'm not here to sell the book. It's Gartner's IP anyway. They get money from the book, not me. I just want to be sure that you all know that this is a resource that's available to you. It's available on in hardcover and ebook and also in audiobook. I also teach Coursera courses on Infonomics and an executive intro to analytics, kind of a data literacy course that I developed. They're being taken by over 5,000 professionals right now. And for those of you who have kids or nieces or nephews or neighbors, considering an MBA or Master's of Accounting, the University of Illinois Geese College of Business also offers an 8-week elective in Infonomics, which I'm pretty sure that I learned as much teaching it as the students do themselves. And I'm always looking for CDOs and others to guest lecture or be interviewed during the classes. So definitely hit me up. Anyway, let's kind of wrap things up. I'd say in short, if you want your organization to make data part of its enterprise strategy, if you wanted to transform the business with data, if you want to democratize your data better, if you want to raise your level of data fluency, to monetize your data better, to improve its quality and governance, to enable improved data deployment and advanced analytics, and of course impress investors and shareholders and the board, then I think it'd be a pretty good idea, not just to hire a CDO, but really make that CDO a true executive in the organization. So I guess that's a bit about it. But I guess finally, as we move into the Q&A, I'll offer this. If you'd like to have a copy of the full kind of groovy infographic that we created with all these charts and findings, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn and I'll shoot you a copy. So with that, I just want to thank you again for attending. Thank the conference organizers for inviting me again. And listen, please do keep safe and well. And in the time remaining, we'll take a few questions. So let's see what's happening here. I'm gonna look at the chat room here.
Sounds like an open and shut case for CDOs in the C-suite.
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, I'm certain there's other ways to achieve these kinds of things, but it certainly seems clear that having an executive level CDO is a more surefire way to get there. So, listen, maybe you're going to save a couple $100,000 hiring a CDO who's not, a true executive, but that's really cutting off your nose to spite your face, as my mother used to say.
Sounds like a report from the CDO should be a regular agenda item in the boardroom.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. That would be certainly something to do as well, to report on not just on the other assets, all the other executives report on the status of other assets, even, the HR executives report on the status of personnel. I think reporting on the status of data is a great idea. Speaking of the HR executives, the idea of Infonomics is partially inspired by some of the work that Dr. Gary Becker and Milton Friedman did at University of Chicago in the 1960s. Before that time, labor, it was called labor or workforce, and it was managed by kind of the administrative services group in organizations. And their ideas about human capital and actually managing workforces and labor as an actual asset, even though you couldn't put it on the balance sheet because you can't own individuals, right? That managing them in much the same way would be a way to generate more value from them. So I think with Infonomics and managing information as an actual asset, we're kind of building on the shoulders of giants there.
Great. Okay, we got some questions from some attendees. Do you know of any good data literacy programs? A. B. How would you deploy the program to get staff engaged, and how would you measure the success of the program?
Yeah, I'm not going to mention any names right now, given that it may be kind of competitive. But we're certainly rolling out data literacy programs ourselves. We're working on something with a large multinational conglomerate and rolling out a data literacy program for their senior executive leaders across all of their 30 or so businesses, but then also an online version or recorded online version for the next level of management. So yeah, there are a number of literacy programs out there of different variety. Yeah. How would you measure the success of a program? Yeah, I think it starts with a kind of a data literacy quiz. You got to take the pulse of individuals and the organization itself to determine their level of data literacy. And when it comes to data literacy, it's not just about knowing how to use a BI tool, but understanding what data the company has, where it is, how to get after it, what are the kinds of regulations, how to use it ethically, as I mentioned, what its meaning is, and then understanding forms of analytics, being able to read and understand, multivariate regression analysis. What does that mean? Not necessarily having to be able to create one, but understanding when and where to use different kinds of analytic and visualization techniques. And those are the things that I focus on, along with providing people who are not data people or IT people a bit of a underpinning, like what's the difference between a data warehouse and a data lake or a data mart or an operational data store, and how does data get from source systems into those systems, and why do we create them in the first place? And all of that kind of underpinning kind of basic stuff I think is important for everyone as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Question, do you know Oh, no, okay, we did that. What, in your opinion, is the most effective reporting line for the CDO? Can a CDO function at the enterprise level if they are not reporting directly to the CEO?
They can, and somebody had a great quote that I saw in Twitter earlier today. I can't remember what it is. I'd have to look it up, but it was a great quote that, you know, a good CDO, you know, doesn't have to be an enterprise executive, actually can affect change, but it's certainly, you know, you could have influence without having authority. It's just having that authority and autonomy and budget and resources is that much more critical. And again, I think any organization that isn't taking a similar road to how they manage their data assets as to how they manage, say, their financial assets, is doing themselves a disservice in today's data economy.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Enjoyed the presentation very much. How can we contact you?
The best way to find me over LinkedIn or you know, tweet at me at Doug_Laney. Probably the best ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you define a data literacy program? What is it composed of, and how do you ensure it is?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of mentioned that a bit.
We did that.
Yeah.
Okay. That jumped in line there. Great presentation.
Yeah.
Gertrude, did we cover all the questions?
Yes, I believe so. Well, someone asked how they could contact you.
Yeah, I
We
just mentioned that.
covered that one.
Okay,
All right.
I think we're good then.
I believe that's it. Any other insights you want to share, Doug, about what you've seen in the last day and a half?
Yeah, I'll mention kind of one COVID-related thing that I've seen. One is, I don't know about you all. Listen, we came up with this model at Gartner, talking about kind of the 4 styles of analytics: the descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. And boy, there's sure of hindsight-oriented analytics about COVID right now. I would love to see some more analytics about predictive analytics and predicting what's going to happen, and or even coming up with kinds of various scenarios. Doing some kind of Monte Carlo simulation. I haven't seen anything like that yet, and I think it's certainly warranted. At an enterprise level, many companies are suffering today with broken forecasts, and I hear this all the time, and I'm working on an article on this. The reason is that their forecasts are based on their own historical data. They're just kind of staring at their own navels or entrails or whatever to try to forecast their business. And given the shock to the economy, that data is just not good anymore. And so it's really a necessity to transform your trend-based forecast and other models to driver-based forecasts. But that requires you to get out there and identify external data sources that are leading indicators of your business. It's very hard to do. It's hard to find these indicators. There's a lot of data out there. There's 5,000 data brokers offering data. There's 10 million data sets published by government organizations. There's billions of social media posts. I mentioned open data sources. There's what I'm missing one, but anyway, there's websites that can be harvested and scraped. So there's a lot of external data out there that can predict your business better than just looking at your own historical data right now. But converting to those kinds of models is very difficult. It requires data scientists, and more than that, it requires somebody to curate that data. So while the data scientist role may be the so-called, I think McKinsey said this, the sexiest role of the 21st century, I think the maybe not so sexy, but certainly has some sex appeal. The role of a data curator is important. Somebody who is responsible for going out there and identifying external data assets and their possibility, how to ingest them, how to contract with them, and so forth. I think that's important. Most companies have an entire department dedicated to ordering office supplies, but they don't have a single individual dedicated to procuring data supplies. And I think that's a real misstep for too many organizations.
Good. Okay, we got time. We had a couple more come in. I think
Sure.
we have some time. As implementing a data information interpretation focus for an organization is an ongoing cultural exchange, what are the best first steps?
Wait, say that again.
Is implementing a data information interpretation focus for an organization is an ongoing cultural exchange. What are the best first steps?
So what we're talking about here really falls back to a data literacy or data fluency. So the first steps would be to assess the level of data fluency and literacy throughout the organization at various levels of the organization and, in various job functions to determine where are there significant gaps. We run maturity assessments. We have a maturity assessment model that considers over 200 different distinct maturity. It's not just a data maturity model, it's a data and analytics maturity assessment. And one of the ways that we like to deploy it is not just for the enterprise as a whole, but to look for disparities at different levels of the organization and for disparities among different business functions. That can be very, very telling. And then, of course, to track that over time like you would with anything else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, comment here. The asset of data to me equals real estate asset. We need to know what it is, occupation, maintenance, value added, monitoring, reporting is applied to the data.
Yeah, I would say if real estate is your primary asset in your organization, then apply that same kind of discipline to the way that you manage and measure and monetize your data assets. If you're a services company, apply the same method you do for your human capital. If you're a physical product company, apply physical asset management. If you're a financial firm, apply financial asset methods and principles to your data. It's not that hard. These practices are out there. It's just a matter of adapting them to the principles and practices and policies for managing and measuring information's value.
Okay, great. And several comments saying great presentation, very clear. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I believe that's it. Do you have any parting shots?
No parting shots. It's a great conference. Thanks everyone for attending again. And I look forward to meeting everyone in person next year. So let's get that vaccine.
Yeah, let's build on this. Okay, well, let's just hold where we are and Barry is going to close us out back at MIT.
All right.
Thanks, Doug.
Cheers.